The power creep meta has been in full swing, and I've been grinding this patch. I think I have a lot of useful things to say to help you survive Season 7. We'll kick off the tier list today with the tank category, which is the most troublesome one to figure out how to not die. I'm not even going to start the tier list with anything in the S or A tier. Starting off at B tier is Zarya and Orisa. These tanks win by default, as they have the most defenses against the highest anti-tank capabilities that are in the game. Overall, playing tank, your goal will be to survive just holding your position, praying for help. With both of these characters, I suggest you hold on to your cooldowns and be reactive with them, because what you'll find being aggressive as any tank, the number of anti-tank abilities the enemy will have waiting for you will overwhelm whatever your plays could be. So instead, it's usually better to outplay their aggression and then punish them for overstepping. Zarya is weak to hit scans. Getting headshot isn't so fun for her and will struggle to close the distance against them. Bastion's still a top pick, and if he traps her in his line of sight for long enough, he can shred through both of her bubbles. Orisa's a bit more durable, but won't have as much DPS, and that's kind of the trade-off. But I would categorize them as neither of them actually carrying the game. They're just the best options to not lose it, and it's much easier to lose the game as tank by trying to do too much, when in reality it's best to play around your very powerful healing, because supports, and specifically healing supports, are the strongest in the game right now. So stay in their line of sight, farm up their ultimates, give them something to heal, and win through attrition. In the recent dev blog, Sigma was rated as one of the highest win rate heroes at the top tiers of play, and Reinhardt was going to be the one for the lower tiers. I don't put Sigma higher though, because I think he's actually more map dependent. In GM, the support player's aggressive aim is so good that you don't need to necessarily mark the outside flanks, whereas on other skill tiers, I think they will struggle to do that. So on any map that has high ground or flank routes, Sigma can't really rely on his team to zone out the map for him to be able to put all the game in front of him, which he can on maps like Circuit Royale or the long hallway in the main neutral fight of Colosseo, for example. He also has a defensive do-nothing playstyle, but actually gets run over by a lot of other tanks, whereas Zarya and Orisa are better brawlers to hold their ground against them. Today's video sponsor is Factor, which I love so much I became a paying customer myself, and let me tell you why. The meals are super easy and fit with a gaming lifestyle perfectly. Just pop a few holes into the package, 2 minutes in the microwave, and you've got yourself a delicious meal. I put emphasis on the taste because how good these taste blew me away. This is above takeout quality food as fast food, but healthy at the same time. They got all sorts of diet options. I go for keto myself. So when you got the perfect combination of tasty, healthy fast food for gaming, grinding Season 7 has been a blast. All right, here I got creamy Parmesan chicken. The flavors on the broccoli are amazing, and the chicken's both moist and flavorful. It's everything you could ask for. I've loved the Baja salmon, filet mignon surf and turf. They've got lots of great options. All of them have been tasty. You gotta taste it to believe it. So to try out Factor today, use my link or go to go.factor75.com and use code POGYAOOCT50 for 50% off your first box. Click the link in the description or scan the QR code with your phone. Doomfist can be as high as A tier if you're good at him. His cooldown cycle is so fast that if you play aggressive but feint your engages, you can pull out cooldowns from the enemy backline before the full commitment fight happens, then punish them. He's kind of the only tank that can make plays, but can be countered as well, particularly with CC stacking team comps. If you got a few disables in your backline and your tank has a stun, there's a good chance he's gonna struggle. I think Junker Queen is the most underrated tank right now. She has the ability to play her own type of game, and my biggest Queen tip for you is to try to use Commanding Shout most often as a defensive ult, similar to how you would bubble a teammate so they can be aggressive with Zarya. When the enemy dives in on you or your teammate's going aggressive, giving them Shout at that moment and capitalizing on their decision making can make Queen a lot easier to play. She can't just rush into the backline. That's not what she does. She holds a corner, zones, punishes aggression, and especially against the really high healing team comps that exist right now, she has both enough burst damage as well as a big ultimate that has a chance up against it. Kiriko is not one of the dominant supports, Lifeweaver is, and considering it can feel impossible to get any kills in Tree of Life, having an ultimate that anti-nades the team is one of the best tank ultimates in the game right now. Certainly, at least, I think she has strong matchups on the tanks below her, even if she can get completely neutralized by Zarya. Roadhog's next in line for being underrated. Since healing is so strong, face tanking as Roadhog to use Take a Breather to gain a heal amp on yourself can farm up your support's ults. So in that defensive playstyle, consider that as Roadhog's biggest strength. If you don't get antied, Take a Breather can tank Bastion's turret form. And once you do all of that, his damage is legit. Look for him to get upgraded when they finally add that Roadhog rework, because he isn't actually too bad right now. As far as tanks go, D.Va's incredibly stable, and if you're defending, particularly using your armor health to face tank your supports, and using Matrix to deny ultimates, and marking flanks, your supports can feel like they're wrapped up in a blanket. However, it might be difficult to find a single target for you to nail down to eliminate yourself. Supports both have a lot of escapes or such high healing numbers that D.Va struggles. All the tanks above D.Va on the list so far have higher damage and burst potential, and that's with good reason. If you're not dealing damage as a tank, it can be hard to feel impactful. Wrecking Ball's another underrated pick, especially as they keep adding maps with very large engagement distances. If you do have good flankers on your team, this is the other option besides Doomfist that'll help you go at the backline. But he's very tough to play on a bad map, but they are adding more maps, especially the new sub-map of Samoa, very big, wide open point, Oasis, some of the flashpoints as well. Ball's underrated right now. And while he can't interact with Bastion, he can run away from him. I think Ball's underrated, but the truth is there's more maps that fits in the movement set that Doom has. Since he does have the option to go straight at you in a hallway, that limits Ball's capability a bit. The map geo he prefers just is a bit more limited. I do think Ramatra has some favorable matchups, particularly when the enemy's backline has high healing and sustain, but low impact. So he's weak to like Ana, Zen especially, and if the enemy supports are landing headshots as Bap or Alari, or supporting anti-tank kit like Bastion, he can struggle to have a purpose and just feels like he's sustaining like a brawler, a budget version of Orisa or Zarya. However, against those super long attritional battles, against support lines like Lifeweaver, Brig, Moira, Kiriko, who either have lots of healing or a lot of escapes, Ramatra's uptime duration outlasts the other tanks, and especially with his ultimate, it isn't one big play, it just keeps going and going. They actually gave him what would have been an outrageous buff in previous patches, reducing a second on his Nemesis form cooldown, which cycles his armor and allows him to punch away, which is his scariest form. But it just turns out that the backline's ability to heal and escape while also having options to be threatening is just so severe that it's not really anything to write home about. But look for that to matter if the support nerfs lean in his way, as I think he has a great matchup against Orisa, Winston, Reinhardt, and Sigma, and playable against a few others. Mainly because he has the shielding poke control playstyle, but then also transforms to be the best brawler, with the ability to medium range cleave and run down targets once the cooldowns start to get drained out. Down at the bottom is going to be Winston and Reinhardt. Surprisingly, Rein's win rate at the lower tiers is really high, but I think if you know how to counter him, he is not a threat whatsoever. You'll see the most value out of these picks when you're using their shields, which the enemy often won't have one if they're playing one of the top tier tanks, and you want to leverage that by taking out the backline's power. Problem is, oftentimes they'll have Bastion, which shreds it easily and isn't efficient for you, because both these characters without their shields are pretty useless. There had always been counters to these heroes, but it used to be the case that those counters had their own exploits and outplays, but the game's gotten so complex over time that a character like Ana, for example, can blow her cooldowns, then get saved by Lifeweaver, who's good in his own right. So it's not even expensive for the team comp to run some all-in protect Ana strategy. It's just totally reliable. Prior to that, to protect Ana, you would need Mercy or Brig, who are, in contrast, much more exploitable by themselves, with more limited positioning and worse ultimates as far as I'm concerned. Don't be too low on them just because they're in the D tier doesn't mean they can't win. Just know you're winning by setting up your team. It certainly is a lot easier to play with a shield in front of you, but don't expect a lot of the damage and eliminations coming from you. Important to the entire meta is the support category, who have some extremely high tier effective picks. Homeboy Batiste finally gets the top spot. The stat line he was rocking many seasons ago made me high on him for a while. He just required the game to slow down to protect around him to get the most out of those OP stats they gave him quite a while ago. In the era of Kiriko, the game was so flanky that it was hard to justify playing a more defensive playstyle. Well, now that's the norm. In the rest of the metagame, Batiste is just surrounded by high health point heroes that as long as you play around him, he can utterly dominate dominate every phase of the game. He can win duels in his own right, completely manage the health points of some of the strongest characters, whether it's your tank, Bastion, etc., has ways to save you from ultimates, and Window is looking ridiculous with the very attrition-based meta we have. Ana we spoke about earlier, and has the best tools to shut down the enemy tank, and now with Lifeweaver in the game to protect her and set her up in positions, she controls a lot of the game, and Nano Boost is key in the ult fight to create actual damage breakpoints for something to die, kind of required for a lot of DPS picks to get any value. Lifeweaver is the most free hero that I've ever seen in the history of this game. Lifeweaver is just so forgiving now. Granted, he needed some of the buffs because he was very easy to pin down before with his really big hitbox, but extra HP, healing on dash, pedal turret to get away, an OP ultimate, relatively short cooldown on life grip, which saves from ults, heals, repositions the team. They buffed his damage to be decent too. It's not as effective as the other support heroes around him, but he doesn't need to use it most of the time to be dominant. The enemy has to be running an extreme mobility comp to actually get on you if you play the right positions, which is a more skillful way to play that is also in itself exploitable anyway. Just toss Tree of Life onto the objective and the team run on. It's just like playing Rally from the GOATS era. They overstated this guy for sure, but I don't see them being too heavy-handed on the rebound either, but I'm sure after nerfs he'll take at least a little bit of finesse. In the A tier, I'm putting Iliari because while she has the highest ceiling, and if you're a top tier DPS player already, you're going to take her very far, I think for most support players, she has the most challenging aim of all. There's nothing spray and pray about it. There's no hitting body shots and still being effective. Nope, you gotta land headshots. They are more forgiving thanks to the huge hitbox. But for me personally, it's kind of like the Kiriko effect. When she came out, high tier players were dominating with her. But for most players, I'm pretty skeptical on how they're handling the difficulty of the character. If you aren't winning duels and your ult isn't winning team fights, I'd wish you were on any other support. That's just easier to play. In the attritional based meta, she needs to land impact, whereas the supports above her gain value more passively. So if you're good, she's top of S tier, but if not, she'll be below even the B tier picks in the next rung of the ladder. In the tank section, we talked about these like durable, escapable supports, Brig, Moira, Curie. In a lot of tank matchups especially, they're not going to have the offense to really impress anything. Remember, Lifeweaver's in the back out healing a lot of stuff, so until the enemy makes a positioning mistake, it's hard to get eliminations on these characters. And while Curie has the flanking Curie kunai warrior playstyle where she can appear in your backline and 2-tap a support, I personally don't see that happen. I think it's too hard to do and pretty easily punished. Kitsune Rush can be a good ultimate, but the A and S tier supports have a much easier time about it. I feel similarly about Zenyatta. At least he does dominate the tank battle, and there's a lot of tanks in the game that hate being discorded, but Trank doesn't really feel required in Overwatch 2. Usually your team isn't clumped together, needing a defensive ult in that way. Lifeweaver pulling you out usually is enough value. I mean, even just pedal platform can counter a full Grav, counter a full Orisa ult, and that's a cooldown. So Zen's just kind of outclassed, especially considering Iliari and Batiste and Lifeweaver all have movement. But if your aim is elite enough, you can make it work. To play Lucio, I think you need the full team comp and teamwork to get that to work. The enemy have to be badly out of position for you to expect to win duels on such a low damage character. But if your tank is already outplaying them, Speed Boost can guarantee he can continue to. And don't underrate the value of speed boosting Bastion's turreted form, which can mow through an entire enemy team. Mercy is left off down in C tier because her playstyle just kind of doesn't exist right now. She loves the off-angle pincer attacks in like a hybrid dive comp with a high-power DPS kind of off-angling like a soldier or a Pharah in the sky. While I think the flyer characters are pretty good, it's pretty tough to get the enemy to split up, and Mercy has a severe weakness that her tank interactions are basically non-existent. She can res your tank after he's been outplayed, but that's not good enough. And because the healing values are so high, there's a lot of times where damage amping a fight is just going to get out healed anyway. So your team badly needs to get on those supports. It can be tough for Mercy to be able to get in that aggressively without being punished herself. So on the right map, with the right team comp, with the players that know you need to play that way, she can be a dominant piece of the team comp, but it's really going to rely on your team ignoring the enemy tank and your tank dodging getting run over. And when it's so easy to just target the enemy tank anyway, your team really has to know how to adjust to that Mercy pick. And honestly, a lot of the targets Mercy would like to support, Lifeweaver can do as well. While not applying damage amp, he has a massive tank save with Life Grip, so she's utterly outclassed by him right now. Last up is the DPS category. We're going to keep Bastion in A tier. I do think he's counterable, but the mere existence of him counters like half the tanks in the game. It's easy to support him with the top supports that exist, with some annoying synergy with Lifeweaver and Batiste, who are already good. Keep in mind that Genji has the same cooldown on Reflect as Bastion's Transform. So with a brawlier playstyle, you can actually deny any of the surprise Bastion mowing your team down. With how high the healing values are, it's pretty tough to knock Bastion out of his armor health, much less burst him down like you'd expect to. Soldier's a pretty good replacement for Bastion on maps that are more wide open. He doesn't have the tank damage, but adding an extra heal station is another self-sustained buff to the team. Remember, they buffed the healing values on that as well. Then on top of it, his damage got a buff, so he'll be able to have a similar playstyle, play around the good supports, but be a bit more accurate in DPS duels, especially zoning out flyer characters. Sim, Mei, and Torb are all great examples of why playing tank is so miserable right now. They are so tanky that tanks struggle to kill them. They have enough tools to hold their ground against their counters, and somehow high damage to kill tanks. It's crazy how they're the best of everything. You can counter them by playing a character like Pharah or Echo, but then you'll be subject to the backline support characters who can deal meaningful hit scan damage themselves. Illari, Ana, Bap all can shoot back at you, not to mention Bastion and Soldier, either going for Echo flanks or using buildings as cover as Pharah. You can outplay all of that, and don't underrate the importance of clearing out Illari turrets. Having mobility to do that is actually kind of a game changer with how strong the pylon is. Hanzo has some good burst potential against a lot of these top tier squishies that like to hold their ground. I mean, a lot of them aren't squishy, and they did remove his ability to one-shot 250 health point characters. Remember that. Mei's got 250, Bastion's got 300, but his logs are kind of forgiving, so with really intelligent placement of his ultimate, he can contribute to actually confirming kills. But if you're whiffing heads, I would say swap off, because so many of these other characters around here are so much easier. I think Genji's a bit underrated right now. It's just pretty easy to pick some of the turret characters that will deter him, but can get an off angle to clear the Illari turret, reflect her damage back at her, and can go out the backline. So if you want that playstyle, I think Genji's your best bet, considering he can also reflect Soldier sights or Bastion's turret. Other B tier picks, Junk, Sojourn, Ashe, all can go higher if you have the skill to do so. I don't think you can just pick these heroes and easily win, but they have damage to land with skill. They're just not like easily fitting in the meta with auto synergies. Nothing wrong with these B tier DPS. It's just that supports are strong, hold their plays so well that you won't like easily beat anything. Whereas the A tier DPS have very clear matchups that they're like built to easily win. Down in the C tier, I'm going to say if you're a specialist, you can play Tracer, Widow, Sombra, Reaper. They did that Sombra rework, and while I am really high on Sombra's potential, I also see most Sombra players still be terrible at the character. No offense. But if you EMP when your team can't follow up, or if you miss Virus, or you pump Virus into tanks, or you think hacking tanks is just going to disable them, it doesn't work like that. Sombra is much less effective against tanks, being a chain of CC to perhaps chain CC, a Wrecking Ball or Doomfist, that can shut down a tank. But for the most part, Sombra is weaker in this version against tanks than she was before. And I think a lot of players just don't know that. Like maybe once they realize that, that will change. I certainly don't feel that effective on the character because I know how to play her, but I just think she takes more skill and I haven't mastered her yet. And I'm better at other picks, which just like go fight things and deal damage easier. But let me explain why this is the case. Virus has a faster DPS rate, but not a higher volume of damage on hacked targets. So it deals 100 damage over time, faster if the target's hacked, but either way, 100 damage on a tank is nothing. But it's insane on a squishy target as you're mowing them down. Sombra players are used to hacking a tank and then mowing into them and seeing them melt, but that doesn't happen anymore. You drop their defenses for a second and a half, that is important, but it needs to be comboed with other things. An EMP only draining 30% of life with a 1.5 second ability lockout, again, it's got to be comboed with something. So it requires precise timing and impeccable aim with Virus, particularly hitting squishy targets. If you're Samito, she looks like a top pick in the game, but otherwise I would rate her as a budget Tracer with a worse ultimate, and I already don't think Tracer's very good. Despite Tracer's skill expression, the gap between how much skill is required versus the ease of playing something else is just too severe for me. Same thing with Widow. It's pretty tough to get away with playing any of these picks in the C tier for long and not have the enemy counter you in a way where you just feel like you should play something easier to execute. With teamwork and incredible execution, they can all be fine, but the moment you start looking too good on them, I swear they're gonna counterpick you, and you should probably just swap. Reaper here lonely in the C tier. You can be super obnoxious to pressure the enemy tank, but because they'll probably be playing the ones that have the defensive cooldowns anyway, as opposed to farming Winston or Ramatra's massive hitbox, yeah, you can get in on Zarya and headshot her when her bubbles are down, but just too few plays to make, to be honest. And that's the entire tier list, guys. Supports reigning supreme, tanks cowering in fear to protect their supports, who are getting the real value in the game right now, and a lot of DPS that are good at holding the formation or punishing things that are out of place. That's the way the Season 7 meta has been shaping up. The counter picks are very severe, and that played more heavily in my decision making in how I ranked these heroes. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to leave it a like, and don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon to actually get notified when our videos come out. That's been it for me. I've been Frito for your Overwatch. I'll see you guys next time.